1961, President Kennedy called on all Americans to rise to the challenges of the day. He knew that success depended upon the unity of efforts throughout the federal government and the nation. The Greater Boston Federal Executive Board, one of 28 across the country, fosters communication, coordination, and collaboration with federal, state, and local government agencies. This is your federal government, and I am your host, Diane LeBlanc. Hello everyone. Today we are featuring the National Guard, a branch of the United States Armed Forces, and we will focus on the Massachusetts National Guard in its unique dual status of being both state and federal. With us today is Major General L. Scott Rice, Adjutant General and Commander of the Massachusetts National Guard. General Rice, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, it's my honor.
So I want to start by sharing with our viewers a little bit about your background and start at the beginning.
Well, back when I was a young child, I was born in Manchester, New Hampshire, and raised in Bedford, New Hampshire. One of 6 kids and 5 sisters that were part of the family, and being number 5 of a family of 6, I was kind of at the end, tail end of all the business and things that were happening, always with my older sisters. So, with great pride, I used to watch, you know, the funniest cartoons and things on Saturday mornings, and every once in a while it would be broken in for a special news report, and CBS or somebody like Walter Cronkite would come on and say, we've got another space launch coming. And I was fascinated by that stuff, and I thought, if I ever had an opportunity to fly, I'd love to do that.
Wow.
So off I go and follow my father's footsteps, became an engineer, but went right into the Air Force, right into the flying for the Air Force as a pilot. And I was fortunate enough to be one of the few to be able to fly fighters. So I flew F-111s on active duty for 9 years, and then separated from active duty and joined the Massachusetts National Guard in the end of 1989. And started flying A-10s with them, and the rest is history. And here I am still in the Massachusetts National Guard since 1989. And I'm pretty honored to be a part of this fine organization.
Okay, so that was a really quick version, because
Yes.
I read your history and it was impressive. We could have done a show just on, you know, the various assignments that you've had. But you come from a military family as well. Talk a little bit about your mom.
Actually, my military side is not my father, grandfather, or great-grandfather. They're the engineering side of the family. My great-grandfather started in Amoskeag Mills back in Manchester, New Hampshire, many, many years ago as a knitting machinist, and made some inventions, and they started their own company back then. And so my father, when I went to engineering school, was very, very excited about me becoming an engineer, and eventually, after he says your time in the military, to come back and work in the family business, which I did for a short period of time. But really my passion was in the military and flying. And I knew I liked it, I knew I wanted to do that, but I really didn't get the depth of character until I did go and start flying in the military. And it was really my mother who started me on that path when she said to me as I'm graduating from college, well done, your father's very proud of you, but you better stay in the military, because I'm watching you and I think you'll really enjoy that. She was a nurse in the Army Air Corps as an officer in World War II. And had served some time in Europe, and then was on the West Coast out in California, ready to get on the good ship and head to Japan if that transpired. But thankfully it did not, and back she came. And my father was on a job out there working for Douglas Aircraft as an engineer for right after he left college. And they met out there in California, and then came back to the East Coast and settled down.
Nice.
And I became a part of that.
Nice, excellent. So your current assignment with the Massachusetts National Guard, you were appointed by Governor Patrick back in 2012. Talk about how that happened.
That's correct. Yes, back in 2012, it was in fact April of 2012. and there was a time and a potential change in leadership, and the governor called and asked me if I would consider becoming the Adjutant General. And I was appointed an interim Adjutant General for a period of time, and then in the fall of 2012, he decided to appoint me permanently through the rest of his term. And then when Governor Baker was elected governor, he reappointed me this past year to remain in the position.
And is there a time limit on your term, or?
It's my time is matched with the governor's term of office. So each time a governor is elected or the governor is reelected, then I get reappointed, or the position becomes interim until the governor makes a reappointment or a new appointment at that time.
All right. I'm guessing you're busy every day, or
well,
what's a typical day like?
This is definitely a busy job. It's not particularly difficult, but there's a lot of engagements to be done because the National Guard, particularly in Massachusetts, is pretty big. We're almost 10,000 airmen and soldiers, 9,000 plus some state employees, and we touch a lot of the communities in the Commonwealth. So I find myself meeting, greeting, talking to people about their issues, their problems, and solutions for the future. And one of the things I'm very proud of is I work very, very hard to allow the commanders, particularly the ones out in the communities that run the smaller organizations we have, to pour as many resources and capability and opportunities for them to train, organize, and equip their force to be ready, as you talked about, to work for the governor, if that is the call, or to work for the president, either one on a federal or state level.
Okay. So you mentioned that the number of individuals that you oversee, close to 10,000 soldiers, airmen, and civilians.
And civilian state workers.
And your budget, approximately?
Is roughly in the order, it fluctuates each year depending upon how much construction we have. That's the biggest variable one. But basically it's around $400 to $500 million a year from the federal government, and about 10% of that is from the state.
Okay. And you mentioned there's several units, unique units. Approximately how many?
We location-wise, we probably have about 50 armories, readiness centers, and bases across the Commonwealth that we have. From very small ones with company-size elements of 100 or 200 people at the most, all the way up to very large bases like the one we have out on the Cape, Otis Air National Guard Base and Camp Edwards as part of Joint Base Cape Cod, to the one in Westfield, out in Barnes, where I flew A-10s for a long time, and that's a pretty big air base, a fighter wing out there that flies F-15s now.
And where's your office located?
Mine is on base at Hanscom Air Force Base as a National Guard building that sits on the federal property there.
Okay. All right. So now I just want to step back a little bit. You know, we've touched on a lot of things already, but give a little bit of history of the National Guard. How was it formed? How was it founded? Where does it get its charge from?
One of the special things we have in Massachusetts is we celebrate on December 13th, 1636, was our birth date of the National Guard for Massachusetts and for the country. So with great pride, every December we have a big birthday party across the whole country and celebrate the birth of quite a heritage of service to our community and our nation. But back then, if you can imagine, that's roughly 140 years before the birth of the U.S. Army in 1775. The Commonwealth at the time, as a colony, formally formed an organization of 3 regiments to defend the colonies, really against the Indians and all the sporadic attacks that were happening on local villages and towns. And so in organizing all the regiments, they got them together, they signed the order, the governor signed the order in December of 1636, and then in April timeframe, sometime in the spring, we had our first muster on Salem, on the Salem Green. And the interesting part of that is we've been having a muster there on the Salem Green pretty much the first weekend of April.
Wow.
For hundreds and hundreds of years. And we're pretty honored by our tradition to think that we're the granddaddy of our U.S. Army, Navy, Coast Guard, Marines, and obviously for me, the Air Force.
Very nice, very nice. So how does the Guard differ from the reserves?
Well, the reserves are strictly a federal entity, and they have their role, their capabilities, and the things that they're really good at on being a integral part of the active duty. But also on the other side, on the reserve side, the federal side, we're very, very similar to the reserves in how we organize, how we train, how we prepare to deploy overseas, how we're activated. But on the other side, because of the laws and the regulations that start with the militia, when the militia was started in 1636, there is a role for us to work for the community and specifically for the governor. And so with a force that's as trained and as capable with all the equipment we have, we can bring a lot of capability to bear right here in our communities to help out. Like last year, the winter stone. How ironic! Today is the start of spring, and we have snow falling outside as we speak. But really, last year, if you remember all the snow and the depth of snow we had, with great pride, we activated a number of soldiers and airmen to put out in the community and help the governor. So that's the unique piece of what makes us a little bit different than the reserves or the active duty. The fact that the governor can reach us so easily, so readily, so quickly.
So it's that dual role. I'd like to delve
Correct.
a little bit more into that. So on the federal side and the troops being deployed, how many units, are deployed or at any one time? What does that look like for the units in Massachusetts?
Well, for us, if I look at, say, the Army and the Army National Guard in Massachusetts, we're pretty proud of the depth of capability we have, because if you look at the branches that the Army presents forces in, and things like artillery and infantry and transportation and aviation and all of those branches that they have, Massachusetts has a piece of just about every branch except for Army armor or tanks and attack aviation. So all of the other branches we have a piece and a part of, and we provide those capabilities and forces to our federal brothers, our active duty brothers and sisters in arms. So with that, we fluctuate on the amount and number of people that are deployed at any one time. A few years ago, we hit a high of over 4,000 soldiers were deployed out of a force of Army, which was roughly about 6,500. So a majority of our Army forces were deployed. And right now, we're at a low. In fact, last August, we hit a unique number of 0 Army soldiers deployed. And that's the first month that we hit 0 since 9/11. And we've been pretty active since 9/11. And to hit that number is a whole change in metric on where we're at. Right now, we have a truck company deployed, and we're preparing some of our infantry soldiers to be deployed overseas. The Air and the Air Guard are structured a little bit different. They don't deploy as often as the Army, and they tend to deploy in smaller numbers than the Army. But when the Air Guard does deploy, like we did in Operation Iraqi Freedom in 2003, in that time frame, we deployed most of our airmen at the time. And in fact, we have a number of airmen deployed and activated doing federal missions right now on the Cape, down on Joint Base Cape Cod.
Busy.
Very busy.
So with regard to the role you play for the Commonwealth and the citizens in the Commonwealth, you mentioned last year the troops were out working the snowstorm. Other examples of, our National Guard in our community?
Well, some of the things that, if you remember the history back in 9/11, we were definitely worried about some of our infrastructure in the Commonwealth, in fact, across the whole country. So we had soldiers armed in uniform in our airports and at our nuclear power plants. And so that really added some depth to some of the things we can do in providing a sense of stability and security to the community, which we're very proud of right now in providing that type of thing now. So when you fast forward to 2013, in April, when we had the Boston Marathon bombing, with great pride, we put a number of soldiers and airmen out into the streets as a sense of calm and stability and providing security for all of our local first responders, which are from police to fire to emergency services, are all the front line of the response to our communities. But right behind them, right with them, is our National Guard soldiers and airmen providing their support and their capability as well.
Is it possible that the Massachusetts National Guard could be called upon to assist another state?
Yes, and we have these agreements, and they're called EMACs, we call them, but basically they're emergency compacts that we have with other states, and it boils down to really who's going to pay for and who's going to take care of our men and women in uniform. So when we send them to another state, it's not really the federal responsibility to pay them and take care of them. It's not our state's responsibility, so it's the other states. So this emergency management compact, this assistance compact, provides a means and a mechanism to legally provide them with the care and feeding when we send them to do a piece of what they do. In fact, it was that type of agreement that Massachusetts called on during the winter storm last year to ask other states around to send some capability, some help to us. So as we look to the north, Vermont and Maine sent down a number of their National Guard soldiers with their heavy equipment to help us, and their engineering equipment, to help us keep our roads and streets clear and commerce back into business.
Oh, nice to have those agreements.
So it is pretty good.
In place. How active is the recruitment effort for the National Guard?
Across the country, it's very active. We all, and I say we, being the active component, the reserve component, and the National Guard, all somewhat fall on the same metric in the sense that about 10% of our force leaves the force a year. So we need to recruit 10, 11, 12% each year of our total numbers to put them into the force, into the ranks, and train them and see if they're compatible, and then get them out, as a viable part of the organization. So our recruiting efforts are very heavy, and if you think about the fact that we have actually 9,000 in uniform, not to mention the civilian workforce, but the 9,000 in uniform, we're recruiting almost 1,000 people a year to put back into our ranks, into our force.
Where are your recruiters located?
And ours in Massachusetts are located all over the Commonwealth. But we have people that come and be a part of the National Guard in Massachusetts from all over the country. We have people living as far away as California, and even some from Alaska come and drill with us and are part of our weekend training and our 2 weeks a year, and even the other numerous amounts of training that we do. They come to our state and our Commonwealth to be a part of who and what we are.
A lot of communities have recruitment offices, and it's sort of one-stop shopping. You've got Army, Marines, Navy, everybody in there. Will you find National Guard recruiters in those entities, or are they separate?
Right now, they're separate, and the reasoning being is there's a slightly different personality that might come into the National Guard than the active service. Okay. The active service is very typical in the sense that you're recruited into the active service, you're part of the force, you move on a regular basis to anywhere around the world, and in fact anywhere around the country, and you never really quite know where you might be, where the needs of the military come to bear in putting you in a location. All the way to the other end of the spectrum, which is the National Guard, where we feel we're our community's force, where people from our community come and join the Guard because either the Armory, the Readiness Center, the Training Center is right down the street, or if not, at least it's in the state and around here. So there's a lot of people that we get out of the local community that say, hey, I'd like to join the Guard. I really want to serve my country, yet at the same time, I really would like to continue with my business, my career, my growing my family and staying relatively in one place. And the National Guard can offer you both of those.
Okay, so talk about the basic commitment for somebody that might be considering the Guard.
Again, there's two paths there. If you're consider your commitment as an officer, or you can consider your commitment as an enlisted member of our force. The enlisted member has to sign a contract, and those contracts range from anywhere from a few years to 6 years. And you sign the contract, and you enlist, and you go into a specific specialty. After a period of time, as you're trained into the specialty, you have the opportunity to change specialties if that's what you'd like, or re-enlist for another commitment on some period of time from a few years up to about 6 years. And then as you build those up, you have the opportunity to accrue enough service as a part-timer to retire after 20 is the earliest, and then you can stay longer depending upon your rank and your position and what training you've had. Those are the enlisted workforce. The officer workforce is slightly different in the sense that you get your college degree, your 4-year degree, and then you join the military, and your commitment is not based on a contract, it's more based on your training. So for me, for example, I was trained as an Air Force pilot. My commitment to the Air Force was 7 years after I finished pilot training. So I had to stay in and serve for 7 years after that. Officer training is very similar. If we send you to school, send you to training or something, each time you go, you acquire a commitment. And then after your commitment's up, you serve at your desire, and you stay as long as your rank, your grade, and your position will allow you to.
So most people who join the Guard, I would guess all who join the Guard, do it because they want to serve their country.
Absolutely. A number of people get in the door, and I count myself included in that, as a kind of a personal look at an opportunity that the military might be able to provide. But once you've been in a few years, there's something magic that happens, and you realize that there are bigger things than yourself in the world, and there are, with great honor, you can serve your community, your state, your Commonwealth, and the country, and really enjoy that. It's pretty special.
What are some of the benefits? I mean, you mentioned college,
Correct. And speaking of college, I was very happy. The U.S. Air Force paid for my 4 years of college. Okay. So I was in ROTC and a very happy benefactor of that benefit. And that was one of the pieces that attracted me to the Air Force and the military. Here I could potentially go fly, and to get to that point, the military was going to pay for my education. I thought that was a great deal, a great opportunity. But there's so many other things, like being able to serve, being able to be a part of this profession and get paid for that. And the military gives you that benefit. But the education benefits, the health benefits that they provide, they're all pretty solid,
substantive.
Pretty substantial.
There we go. So how old do you have to be to join the Guard?
You have to be 18, or you actually can be 17 with your parents' permission. Mm-hmm. And we're very cautious about somebody that's too young joining, because one of the things we like and we want, we're very proud in the Guard particularly of the fact that just about all of our ranks, in fact, have a high school degree, high school education. So we really want to protect that for our youth, to not only be a part of service, but also to start on that path, finish your high school, get your degree in high school, and then join and serve in the military. And if your future and your aptitude is right, we want to help you go to college and become part of that. The Guard tends to be much higher education level on average than any other piece of the military, just because we're built that way, and you can stay in one place and you can enjoy those benefits.
So you mentioned the aptitude test. Obviously, you've got an academic requirement, you've got a physical requirement.
Yes.
But the aptitude test that you give potential candidates, what does that look like? Is that like a 3-day test, or are they locked in a room? How does that work?
Well, we do lock them in a room, and they do take the test. It's not a 3-day test, but it's a test that we we present to them and just see where they fit in the aptitude. And there's a number of people that sign up and would like to join the military that just can't get through that test. Mm-hmm. And so that's difficult, and we try to help and provide even opportunities there. I know we had talked about earlier about junior ROTC in high schools, and even though that's not a National Guard program, that's a great program to provide young kids and our youth with great discipline and an ability to look to leadership and say, I can do that. Any one of our youth can be a part of this American dream and build a better place for themselves. And so that's the kind of thing we really protect and want to instill in our youth as they come into the military.
Does the National Guard have a youth leadership program, or how does the National Guard, on a daily basis connect with communities, absent a major storm or a civil unrest? Is the Guard out there in the communities in a different way?
Not really as overtly as being a part of a junior ROTC program, and we don't have a program like that specifically geared to the National Guard. There's not really a youth program. So our connection is more secondary and tertiary, where we have members of our organizations living in the communities. When there are community events, the Guard gladly participates in all of those types of things outside of emergencies. And then during emergencies, we're there, ready, always willing and able to be a part of the solution, not the problem.
There we go. So you've been associated with the National Guard for a number of years.
Yes.
What are the biggest changes that you've seen?
The biggest change is the use of the Guard and the fact that we started out probably in the 90s with a big drawdown of the military at that time, that the Guard became an integral part of the active duty and reserve service. That the active cannot function on a large scale without the Guard, and the Guard can't function on a large scale without support from the active duty. So the marriage we have with the active part of our service and how we are very well connected and how we're very well trained has really changed over the 90s and 2000s. And now we have such an operational force where years ago, and probably 30, 40, 50 years ago, it took some time to get a Guard unit up to speed with the older equipment and sometimes no equipment, to get them trained on equipment, get them organized so that they can operate as a functioning force together. It may take months and sometimes 6 months, even year to get them ready. Where now, our ability to get ready to deploy on a federal basis to do our federal mission is so much shorter that we throw around these terms like we used to be a strategic reserve, only break that box open in times of total chaos and war, where now we're used on a much more operational basis, and we become an operational reserve rather than a strategic reserve of the U.S. military.
And for the future, what do you see?
The future, I don't see much changing with the significant pressures on our national economy and enterprise on all sorts of areas, even outside the military, that in these budgetary times, we have to think harder, work smarter, and be able to leverage every piece of how we can present security around the world, at the same time, not have this endless amount of budget and money to support that. We have a very limited amount of money in our country to support this, but we have a responsibility to do it. So it's that balance that will keep the Guard in the forefront as a part of a very operational force for our country.
We talked about the minimum age to join the Guard. Is there an age at which one is too old to join the Guard?
Yes, there is an age, and it depends a lot on your specialty and what things you're going into. For example, physicians and attorneys, you can be into your 50s, and we've even acquired a doctor who is in his 60s to join. But those are very unique capabilities, unique situations. One of the things the military likes to look for is, can you be able to serve for about 20 years or so and be a part of the force? Wow. So if you back that up from a retirement age around 60 back to 40 is probably, for the average person, the oldest, but most of our age limits are around 30 to get somebody in. So in that window in your 20s is really our sweet spot on the age that we're looking for people.
And somebody who's considering joining the National Guard, how does that work with their full-time employer? The law protects them while they do their Guard service?
Yes, it does. We have this this acronym called USERRA, but it's basically U.S. employment code that allows you to serve in the military and have protections with your full-time job. So that a full-time employer must provide, according to the law, an opportunity for you to serve and deploy and be part of the force for up to about 5 years, and then be able to come back and reintegrate into the workforce at a similar position that you left. And those laws are pretty robust, and it's a great benefit that really makes the National Guard work and the reserve component work for our country. And you don't see this in many other countries in the world, and part of it is because of this great commitment by the federal government with their laws, but also commitment by the community that I see a lot of people, employers in our community, that go above and beyond what the law asks for and requires in helping members serve in the military. Well, like myself, I'm a pilot for United Airlines, and I'm on a leave of absence from United, serving our Commonwealth and our government in the National Guard right now.
Now you have some additional things that you do. You serve on various committees and the secretary of a major committee that I saw. What is that about?
Well, we have an association of all the adjutant generals across the country, and we've organized ourselves into committees and focus areas like personnel and Army force structure, air structure, cyber and IT systems, and a committee on all of our buildings and infrastructure, things like that. And even Homeland Security, we have a committee on that. So I was fortunate last year to be asked to run the committee for the Air National Guard force structure. Okay. So I tend to spend a lot of my times thinking about where we are across the country on improvements and changes to our capability, and how can I help the Air Force help us all in moving the whole force forward with the big three things we worry about in the military. That's our personnel, taking care of our people, taking care of all of our equipment that we have now and modernizing that, and then recapitalizing that equipment with newer equipment, newer, say, aircraft for the Air Force and things like that. So those are the big three things that I work on with the military.
So this is a loaded question. How does the Massachusetts National Guard compare to other states around the country?
We're pretty fortunate in the sense that we pride ourselves on, we're one of the most respected organizations in the country, and we like to think, we don't want to say we're better or worse than anyone else, and that's not a metric we're looking for. What we're looking for is respect and professionalism on what we do. And so we're very proud that other units, other places, even the Pentagon with all the Department of Defense, calls out to Massachusetts, not only with the Air National Guard, but with the Army National Guard, and say, how do you do it? How do you figure it out? How is it that your recruiting is over 100% and everyone else is not doing so well? How is it that your soldiers and airmen are just a little bit more ready than the average across the country? What is it that magic you guys have? And I tell you, Massachusetts is probably one of the most patriotic places in the country. We don't have a lot of military organizations up in the Northeast, so the ones we do have, we're very proud of how we integrate into the community and how well the Commonwealth takes care of all of us.
So I understand that you were given the nickname Catfish.
Yes.
What does that mean?
So, as a pilot, particularly a fighter pilot, you don't ask for your name or your call sign, as we call it, but you're given a call sign. So, whenever I flew the A-10 around the Commonwealth for any training or anything like that, I always used my call sign when I was leading the flight. So it was always a Catfish flight or whatnot. So each one of our fighter pilots has their own call sign. So most people in the Air Force and the Air National Guard know me by Catfish. And usually there's some event back in time that you get tied to a call sign. Some of them are, logical, with somebody's last name that might be a little crazy, and there's some crazy thing that's attached with that name. But for me, I was just starting flying the A-10, and we had a flight chief on the flight line that made sure he knew those were his planes and he owned them, and if I messed with him, I'd have to answer to him.
There we go.
And so here we are. I come back from a flight, and some of the crew chiefs had, stuck some branches in the gear or something like that, and made the plane not look very good. And so here I am taxiing in, and this flight chief, he never swore, never got upset, but boy, when he saw me, he was really mad. Thought I had done some real damage to the plane, and he called me the lowest thing in that mud pond out there was me and those bottom-dwelling catfish. So ever since then, that name stuck with me, and I've had it ever since.
There you go.
So.
It's so wonderful to see, really, the pride that you have when you talk about the National Guard. I think that the Commonwealth of Massachusetts is very, very lucky to have you in charge of this operation. We've certainly covered an awful lot of territory. What haven't I asked you about that you think is important to share with our viewers?
Well, one thing I want to say to you is, as a community, when we grow together, the problems we face are, you would think that they're uniquely with public service, uniform service, or military service. But I think we're all a part of that. Mm-hmm. And so that's the part where you say, where you're honored to have me a part of the Massachusetts National Guard, but I'm actually more honored to be in this community because of what I see, the people I meet, the amount of benefits Massachusetts gives to veterans, the amount of support all of those in uniform service gets from the community, and the patriotism, which I talked about earlier, is really special. And if there's one place in the country I would bring my most precious asset to me personally, and that's my children, to raise them, have them grow, is here in this community, because this is, for me, the place to be. I really love it here. I've raised 2 children here, and now my daughter is raising 2 grandchildren here.
Nice.
in our Commonwealth, and I'm pretty proud of that. And I see that I'm nothing special. I'm normal, along with everyone else that is very, very proud to be a part of our Commonwealth. This is ours.
I agreed with everything that you said, except that you're nothing special, sir.
Oh, thank you very much,
Thank
Diane.
you so much for your service. Again, I want to thank General Rice for joining us today and for helping us to better understand the important roles of the Massachusetts National Guard in serving both our Commonwealth of Massachusetts and our nation in times of need. I thank you for watching, and I hope that you will continue to join us as we feature other federal agencies on your federal government.